Hello everyone. So today we are going to start our topic, which is actually limiting reactant. So in this topic, we will firstly describe the definition of limiting reactant. What is limiting reactant? So we can define it in three ways. The first is a limiting reactant is in a chemical reaction is a substance which is used up first. So that reactant which is used up first, which completely consumed up first, that reactant is known as limiting reactant. And the second point is stop the chemical reaction, because when a reactant used up first, then the other reactant will stop reacting, so that is why it stop the chemical reaction. And the third point is limit the amount of product, because the rate of reaction depends only on the limiting reactant. If the limiting reactant completely consumed, then the reaction stop and the product formation will also stop. So it has total 3 points. The first point, it is used up first, stop the chemical reaction, and limit the amount of product. So moving toward next, the next point is reacting amount. We can explain it with an example, within a simple example. Let's suppose we have a table setting. In each table setting, there is two to four things: plate, fork, knife, and spoon. Each table setting has one thing. Mean one plate, one fork, one knife, and one spoon. So next, my question is, how many table setting possible for 5 plates, 6 forks, 4 spoons, 7 knives? So how can we determine the limiting atom in the whole setting? You should have to focus on the thing which is present in the less amount. So by this thing you can easily identify the limiting item. So what is the limiting atom? Actually it is spoon, because these are present in less amount, so it consume earlier and the table setting will stop. So next point, here is the table. In this table you can see that initially these things are present. This is the initial amount of the plate, forks, spoons, and knives. So we can because spoons is a limiting reactant, so only 4 table setting can be formed. So the plate 1 leftover, fork 2 leftover, spoon 0 leftover. 0 leftover mean it consumed completely, it is used up, so it is known as limiting reactant. Okay, so next example, the next thing is, if we define the limiting or excess reactant, we can define it an easy way. Actually, when we are discussing a reaction, there are two types of the reactant. The first one is limiting reactant and the second one is excess reactant. Limiting reactant is actually limit the extent of reaction. It tells us about that how much a reaction can proceed further. So limiting reactant stop the chemical reaction and it stop the chemical reaction. Okay, the next thing is excess reactant. What is mean by excess reactant? Excess reactant mean the reactant which is left over when the reaction stop. So these reactant which are left over are known as excess reactant. So the next point is another example. Let's suppose we have bread and bread slices and jam, butter jam. Okay, we have 8 slices bread and 1 jar peanut butter. So we mix them very well and make the sandwich from them, and at the end the peanut butter will left over and all the bread will consume. So these breads are limiting reactant and these are excess reactant. Moving toward next, here is another example which is actually a numerical type example. So in this we have the data that we have 4 mole of hydrogen and 2 mole of chlorine. Okay, from this information the question is that how many moles of hydrochloric acid can form. Okay, the first one is 4 mole of hydrogen, 2 mole of chlorine. So we are going to we are going to determine the amount of or the moles of hydrogen chloride, yeah, or hydrochloric acid. So first of all, if we want to find the amount of HCl, we will have to find the number of mole. So how can we find it? Actually, the very first step to find the amount of limiting reactant is that we will uh, we will uh, we will determine the number of mole of the product from each reactant, either it is H or either it is chlorine. Okay, here we have 4 mole of hydrogen. 4 mole of hydrogen produce 2 mole of HCl. So that is why it produce 8 mole of HCl, because if you see that 1 mole of hydrogen it produce 2 mole of HCl. So if we have 4 mole of H, then it will produce 8 mole of HCl. Simply we have 1 mole of chlorine, it will produce 2 mole of HCl. So if we have 2 mole of HCl, then how much it will produce? It will produce 4 mole of HCl. So the next my next point is hydrogen is producing larger number of mole of HCl and chlorine is producing lesser number or smaller number of HCl. So in this way the limiting reactant is chlorine. So that is another example by which we can easily find out the limiting reactant. So in this way you can also determine how much the excess reactant are left over. Here the chlorine is actually the limiting reactant, so at the end of the reaction 0 mole of chlorine will remain, but here the 2 mole of hydrogen are used, so 2 mole of the hydrogen will left over. So that is the point. So that is by this process we can find out the limiting reactant. Here is another example. We have 3 mole of calcium which react with the 1 mole of nitrogen and it will produce calcium nitride, 1 mole of calcium nitride. So we are going to find out the limiting reactant, either it is calcium or it is nitrogen. So let's move toward our question. Okay, 4 mole, we have 4 mole of calcium. 4 mole of calcium, let's suppose we have 3 mole of calcium and it will produce 1 mole of calcium nitrate. So if we have 4 mole of calcium, then how much it will produce the calcium nitrate? We divide the 1 over 3, so it will produce 1.60 mole of calcium nitrate. The same procedure will we will use for nitrogen. If we have 2 mole of nitrogen and if we in the equation we have 1 mole of nitrogen and it will produce 1 mole of calcium nitrate, but in case of 2 mole we will divide 1 over 1 and it will produce 2 mole. So here you can see that the calcium is producing less number of mole of the product as compared to nitrogen. So in this case the calcium is limiting reactant. Okay guys, at the end of the lecture here I can give you some example, so you can pause the video and solve it by yourself. If you have any question related to this, you can ask me the question.